Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to my room. Today we're going to be taking a look at a comment that a person by the nickname of Period, literally the period, left on my Why INFJs Keep Questioning Their Type video. And without further ado, let's have a look at the comment and what it says and what it asks. I think it's quite an interesting observation that I want to react to. So we're going to do it here. Ren, I have a sincere question for you around typing. I've long considered intelligence, both traditional and emotional, to be independent of cognitive function. Yet these factors seem to play a huge role in those who type others externally. For example, I believe that any of the purported intellectual or philosophical INFPs would never be identified as such, but rather they'd end up in the INFJ bucket or something similar. To put it another way, today, after many years on this earth, I type as INFJ. However, am I only typing as INFJ by virtue of the growth of intellectual and emotional intelligence? Would anyone type as INFJ, given enough years to grow? What would my type be deemed as 2 decades past? Would it really be INFJ? Is the label INFJ only quantifying growth and or achievements by individuals in reasoning and interpersonal skills versus an actual type? In other words, how does one differentiate the learned INFP intellectual or philosopher from the INFJ? Someone automatically deems me INFJ from such conjecture, but I dare you to find me 1/100th more intelligent than purported INFP Kierkegaard or St. Augustine. So then, how does one resolve this dilemma? These questions plague me. Any thoughts are appreciated. So thank you very much for this comment. And let's see how I can reply to you. I think you're raising an interesting point here, which is that external typing is essentially a fallible thing. Most of the time, external typing is wrong, and this is something that it cannot be emphasized enough. Most of the time, external typing is wrong. It's enough to just look at any celebrity online, go to a forum, and there's a few of them that attempt to give a type for any kind of actor or celebrity of any sort, and you'll notice that the opinions are divergent, and it's rare to have people who actually agree on a given public personality's type. Take someone as to me, I'm saying to me, as clearly INTJ as Elon Musk, for example. I was quite convinced that not only I thought that Elon Musk was INTJ, but also that the internet as a whole was pretty much in agreement that he is INTJ. And at some points on the forum that I frequent, infjs.com, someone started a thread on the type of Elon Musk, making the point that he was ISTJ, and trying to give an argument to that, giving a proper argument to that with interesting points. And I was thinking, well, this person is going to be in disagreement with pretty much everybody else who will insist that Elon Musk is an INTJ and give the different reasons. But no, that's not what happens. A lot of people were in agreement or were willing to consider the possibility that Musk was ISTJ, and then there were people who said that he was something else or ISTP. And I would say that perhaps more people than the average, more than half of the people were in agreement that Elon Musk is an INTJ, but I was expecting a 90 to 99% level of agreement, and it was only maybe 50 to 60%. So you can see that even for someone who, in my opinion, embodies everything that an INTJ has, strong NI, strong TE, strong FI, and SE, maybe that's less obvious, but let's just focus on the three functions. I think Musk displays a lot of NI, a lot of TE, and a lot of FI. But, that doesn't mean that everyone was agreeing with that, and maybe people have researched it more than I have, most certainly, and they were putting forward good arguments. So given that happens with someone like like Musk, who some people would consider as close to an archetypal INTJ, you can expect that to happen with people who are a little bit less archetypal. So that's one thing. For example, like it's true that on this channel, people seem to be pretty agreed that I am an INFJ, which is nice because I guess, you know, I feel like I'm not wasting people's time. But you know, there's the occasional person who tells me that maybe I'm an INTP or whatever, you know. And in fact, on the very forum that I mentioned to you, I created a thread. And it's a practice that's quite common on that forum, which is to create a thread and ask people like, what do you think is my type, and have a little poll that you create, and people can vote and select one of the 16 types, for example. And I got 70% INFJ, so you can see it's quite a large majority, and that's nice. But there's still 30% that didn't vote for INFJ. Now, some of them were trolling, admittedly, but still there were people who said ENFJ. I got 0 INTP in that case. I think my writing persona, or my writing sort of image, as opposed to my speaking image, is a bit more INTJ-ish or T-ish, because the FE comes across a bit less. I think it's more visible in my facial expressions than in what I write sometimes. But in any case, that's beside the point. But the point I want to make here is that people are going to see the functions that they want to see in you. And only a select few, or at least not, but by no means the majority of people, are going to be very discerning, perceptive, and mastering the functions and the knowledge of the functions enough to be able to make correct typing most of the time. And so do not put too much credence into people who externally type, because a lot of the time they're just not in agreement with one another, and most of the time they're wrong. Sometimes they're right, but you will see that someone is right if they manage to give an explanation that is detailed and convincing. So that's the first thing that I wanted to emphasize. Now, you say that you think that any purported intellectual philosophical INFP would never be identified as such, but that they would be thrown into the INFJ bucket. Well, considering the premise that external typing is fallible, then yes, that could happen. In fact, I would say that an INFP philosopher might well be considered something else than INFJ, because INFJ is a type that's often associated with philosophers. But in fact, the types most associated with philosophy are, beside INFJ, INTJ and INTP. So you could very well imagine an INTJ with strong FI who's seen as an INFP, or an INFP, or even potentially an ENFP who in writing has stronger than expected TE, who could be seen as an INTJ. And so, you know, what I mean is that this is not only a curse of the INFP, it can be a curse of any potential type. It's just hard to type people that we are not directly in contact with. Only Elon Musk himself and people who are around him know exactly what type he is. And only you know what type you are. And this allows me to progress towards your further observation here, which is, you say that after many years on this earth, you type as INFJ. And you ask whether you type as INFJ by virtue of the growth of intellectual and emotional intelligence. Well, you see, the thing is, you're not like both INFP and INFJ. That's for sure. It's not possible, especially given that the two types have no functions in common in their main stack. Now, there are some people who think that it's possible to change one's type from extroverted to introvert, so from INFJ to ENFJ, or the reverse. And it's true that in general, as we tend to get older, as we tend to move into adulthood and get older, we have a tendency, it seems, to become, a lot of the time, to become a little bit more extroverted or a little bit more introverted. For example, I can tell my mom is a little bit more extroverted than she used to be. Now she's still ISFP, doesn't make her an ESFP, and I don't think it's possible to change one's dominant function, because I think that one's dominant function, it goes way beyond whether you're extroverted or introverted. It identifies whether your dominant function is extroverted or introverted, which is very different. So an extrovert and introvert will have different dominant functions. And if you accept that your dominant function is how you see the world, by what sort of magic metaphysical spell would you suddenly see the world differently? I think maybe that can happen in the case of trauma, in the case of shock, in the case of certain things like these. And I mentioned that before, and hopefully I can make a video on that at some point. I think Running Fox asked that question. Or it could have been someone else. Maybe it was Jill. Anyway, sorry about that. But trauma and type is an interesting topic. But you're not going to be both INFJ and INFP. So, I mean, roughly speaking, either you're INFJ or you're INFP. And if you're INFP, at least in my opinion, you'll be an INFP all your life. If you're an INFJ, you'll be INFJ all your life. Now, the reason why you now type as INFJ could be put for plenty of reasons. Now, you say that you type as an INFJ. Does that mean that you go online and that you take a test and what you get is INFJ, whereas you used to get INFP? Do you mean that you usually identify as INFP with people, maybe people who are familiar with MBTI and who know you, type you externally as an INFJ now? Or do you mean that you do like self-study with the functions of yourself, maybe in consultation with some close ones, and that you now identify with functions that you used to not identify with? Well, I mean, I'm assuming that's not the last case, because it would be hard for me to imagine that someone who used to identify with NI, FE, and TI, for instance, like an INFJ would at some point in their lives realize that they no longer so much identify with that, but that they identify more with NE, FI, and T, or with NE, FI, and SI, or something like that. I just don't really see how that's possible. So my guess is, but maybe you will correct me, is that you type as INFJ because now in the tests what you get is J instead of P. But remember, the tests are even more fallible probably than the people who externally type, because at least the people who externally type, they ratiocinate, they have a consciousness, they compare different possibilities, and they reason in terms of functions. Most tests, the vast majority of tests, don't reason in terms of functions. They reason in terms of dichotomies. So maybe you get an INFJ now just because now as you get older you're a bit more organized, as we often tend to become when we're older, or more responsible, whatever. and the tests tend to be geared toward giving a J answer when you answer that. Now that's bullshit in terms of the distinction between J and P, but the fact of the matter is this is what happens in the case of a lot of tests. So maybe it could be simply that, because growth of intellectual and emotional intelligence, you see, that's not something that's measured by belonging to an INFJ type or to an INFP type. If anything, emotional intelligence is like the domain of INFPs. It's like the archetypal type for emotional intelligence. And intellectual intelligence, the archetypal type would be INTP. And then you have in the middle, you have INFJ and INTJ, who are kind of a bit of both. With INFJ oriented a bit more towards emotional and INTJ towards intellectual. But these are archetypes, obviously. These are not exactly the reality, but that's kind of what it would be. So why would you become INFJ if you're like even more emotionally intelligent? You're probably even stronger in your FI if you're an INFP. So I don't really understand how that can happen, other than because tests are fallible, because external typing is fallible. Trust yourself. Do the self-study. Study the functions. Make sure that you understand the functions well, and you will see a pattern. And when you have your pattern of main functions that you identify with the most, compare the stack that you come up with the archetypal stacks of each type, and you will see that the pattern of your stack will look most like the patterns of one of the archetypes, and that suggests that you will belong to that type, broadly speaking. But these are tendencies, you know, it's nothing has rigid boundaries necessarily, okay? Sorry about my voice, for some reason it's a bit hoarse. So there you go, you know, I think that's the bulk of what I wanted to say. For people who are well versed in typing, and there are lots of people who are well versed in typing, you know, who have a close understanding of function use, and who are able to see it, discern it in different people, in writing and speaking and video and behavior and lots of different contexts. They will be able to tell the difference between an INFP philosopher and an INFJ philosopher, because they will recognize the use of FI in an INFP philosopher. You see, for example, you cite Augustine, you see plenty of FI in the Confessions. So of course, you know, that's going to orient someone towards assuming that that Augustine is an FI user. If you look, for example, at someone like, like Hegel, for instance, well, Hegel's vision of the dialectic and of absolute spirit is like, it's a vision that he has. It looks very much like an unevidenced vision that he's going to develop. And then you'll notice that he also takes into account the influence of external institutions on the development of spirits, etc., in various incarnations, and you will recognize some TE in there, and then you'll say INTJ. But people who say, oh, this person cannot be INFP because they philosophize, it's a very naive and very basic and not very developed approach to typing. So just stop trusting those people. And keep in mind that the people who are in the know, the people who can type well, people who have the knowledge and who remain neutral, you know, they exist, but they're not the majority. And that's not what their approach to typing will be. Now, do I think that there are more INFJ philosophers than INFP philosophers? Among the well-known philosophers, I think that perhaps there are a few more INFJ philosophers, but there are definitely plenty of INFP philosophers. You mentioned those two. Kierkegaard is a bit of a contested terrain because, you know, the case could be made for his being an INFJ, but you know, you also have Rousseau. Apparently Adorno is usually seen as one as well. So you have lots of INFP philosophers, and that's completely fine. You know, has nothing to do with whether they're great philosophers or not. What matters is, do they use a lot of TI? Do they use a lot of FI? Do they use rather NE or NI? And you build the stack based on what you perceive. You systematize your percepts, and then you conceptualize the type of the person. This is how you do it, okay? So most likely you've always been an INFP, or you've always been an INFJ, and no one will ever take that from you, okay? See you soon, guys, and let me know what you think in the comments. Bye!